The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached the edge of my property, each step echoing against the stillness of the early morning. The fog clung stubbornly to the hills, curling around oak trunks and rolling over the fence lines I had marked with painstaking care over the last decade. This land wasn't just dirt and grass to me, it was history, labor, and every measurement I had ever taken as a county surveyor. And now it felt violated. There it was. The stark, white fence slicing across my ranch like a wound. Each post gleamed in the morning sun, rails tight, chains taut, as if daring me to contest it. And at the corner, like a statue carved from self-righteousness, stood Karen Mullins, hands on her hips, chest thrust forward, her smile that predatory, triumphant kind. I could feel the anger rising in me, simmering beneath the calm surface. "Morning, Karen," I said evenly, though my voice carried the weight of decades of authority and patience stretched thin. She didn't even glance at me at first, too busy admiring her handiwork. Her husband, Mark, lingered a step behind her, looking like he wished he were anywhere else but here. Finally, Karen's eyes flicked toward me. Recognition dawned, quickly replaced by that smug little expression that always made my teeth grind. "Well, if it isn't Colton Hayes," she said, voice dripping with sweet malice. "What brings the county surveyor out to admire my work?" I let a pause hang between us, letting the tension stretch as long as the line of fence itself. Every inch of this metal and timber represented her arrogance, her sense of entitlement. Then I gestured toward the fence. "Funny," I said, voice steady, "I don't remember approving this line across my property." Her head tilted, eyes narrowing. "Colton, every permit you signed. Right there in the county records. Don't try to twist this." I let out a quiet, humorless laugh, shaking my head. "Oh, Karen. The county records don't lie. And neither do survey lines." Mark stepped forward, a look of unease on his face. "Come on, Karen. It's just a fence. Don't make it a big deal." I turned to him slowly, letting the weight of my gaze settle on him. "Just a fence?" "Mark, this just a fence bisects my cattle pasture, blocks access to my well, and encroaches 50 feet onto my land. That's not just a fence. That's theft. By the law, by logic, and by common sense." Karen let out a high, sharp laugh, the kind that grates against the eardrums. "Well, maybe your cattle just need to learn their boundaries, Colton. Or are you too busy hiding behind your survey stamps?" I leaned my hand against the fence post closest to her, feeling the metal vibrate under my fingertips. "Funny you mention hiding. You see, when I signed those permits, I made absolutely sure the lines were precise. Every post, every stake, every corner was measured down to the inch. And guess what? I tapped the post. Your fence isn't." Her eyes flickered to the corner where one post leaned slightly, a subtle but undeniable error. The land itself seemed to recoil from her intrusion. Her smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before she quickly recovered, though the spark of doubt lingered in her eyes. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a sheaf of papers, letting the morning sunlight glint off the county seals. Survey plats, signed permits, GPS readings, every bit of documentation that proved my point. I flipped them open, letting the evidence speak louder than any threat or argument. "I see," she said, voice tight, as she glanced down at the papers. Her smile shrank, though she fought to maintain a mask of superiority. "Well, maybe the county records are wrong. It wouldn't be the first time." I didn't move, didn't blink. "The county records aren't wrong, Karen. And neither is the law. Or a surveyor's eye." Mark shifted uncomfortably, casting his gaze to the fence. "We didn't realize. I mean, we thought." "I don't care what you thought, Mark," I interrupted, voice low, cold. "The fact is, that fence belongs on the wrong side of this line. And by your own HOA rules, it's encroaching on private property." Karen's lip curled. "You're threatening me, Colton?" I shook my head slowly, letting my anger simmer beneath calm authority. "Not threatening. Informing. I'm giving you a choice. Move the fence back to the line in the permit, or I'll start the paperwork to declare it an illegal encroachment. And trust me, Karen, the county doesn't take kindly to people ignoring a surveyor's line." Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed in a tight line. "You're bluffing." I smiled faintly, a quiet, deliberate curl of the lips. "Try me." The silence stretched. Even the cattle in the pasture seemed to sense the tension, lowering their heads as though they were waiting to see how this would unfold. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and grass, tangling with the faint metallic tang of the fence, sharp against the softness of the morning. Karen's mind raced. I could see it, subtle shifts in her posture, the way her fingers drummed against her hip. She was calculating, weighing her options, but deep down she knew the truth. Every move she'd made had been monitored by someone who understood land better than she ever could. Someone who could take her little kingdom of trimmed hedges and meticulous paint lines and expose it for what it was: overreach. Mark cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the tension. "Maybe we can talk this out? Find some compromise?" I shook my head. "There's no compromise here. You've built a fence on land that isn't yours. That's a fact. Facts aren't up for debate." Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out physically, but she caught herself, stepping back and folding her arms like a queen retreating to her throne. Her ego was bruised, but not yet defeated. "Fine," she said, voice sharp and controlled. "We'll see what the county says." I nodded, tucking the papers back into my jacket. "The county already says what's right. I've already recorded everything. You just need to acknowledge it." She turned abruptly, walking toward her SUV with Mark trailing behind her, leaving the fence standing like a challenge I was destined to meet. I stayed by the corner post, hand brushing against the cold metal, staring out over the pasture. My cattle wandered nervously along the edges, sensing the tension in the land. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grass along the fence line. The early sunlight glinted off the white rails, making the encroachment feel almost obscene against the rolling green of the ranch. I made a silent promise to the land and myself: by nightfall, this fence would either come down or be corrected. This wasn't just about property lines. It was about respect for the land, respect for the law, and respect for the quiet authority of someone who measures, documents, and protects. And Karen Mullins, for all her bluster, had stepped straight into a world she didn't understand. The morning stretched on, thick with anticipation, the kind that makes a person acutely aware of every sound: the low snort of a horse, the call of a crow, the subtle shift of the fence posts under their own tension. I could feel history in the making, and it was mine to write. By late morning, the sun had climbed high enough to burn off the lingering fog, but the heat did little to ease the tension that had settled over my ranch. The pasture, still partially fenced by Karen's intrusive white posts, looked less like land and more like a stage set for a confrontation. Word had spread quickly. HOA gossip travels faster than wildfire, and it seemed everyone within a 10-mile radius knew that Colton Hayes, county surveyor, was standing his ground against Karen Mullins' overreach. I could see them arriving from the ridge, neighbors with curious faces, some holding coffee cups, others snapping pictures on their phones, their whispers blending into a low murmur that rippled across the property like a restless breeze. A few HOA board members had shown up, their expressions a mix of obligation and hesitation. They were the ones who policed mailbox heights and hedge trims with obsessive zeal, yet now they seemed small and uncertain, like children caught in a storm they couldn't control. I stood by the fence, leaning on the corner post, letting them settle into place while I assessed the situation. Karen was in her usual spot, hands on hips, glaring at me with the intensity of someone who believed that sheer willpower could rewrite the world. Mark lingered slightly behind her, chewing nervously on the inside of his cheek, clearly aware that this wasn't going to end in his favor. Karen, naturally, made the first move. "Colton, everyone, listen up," she called, voice ringing with forced authority. "Apparently, he thinks a fence can't go up without his approval. Isn't that right?" Her eyes flicked to me, sharp as a hawk's. "Tell me, Colton, do you really think one little fence is going to ruin your precious pasture?" I let a quiet laugh escape, shaking my head. "Not one little fence, Karen. This fence bisects my cattle pasture, blocks my well, and encroaches far beyond the line on your own permits. That's not little. That's lawbreaking, and it's exactly why boundaries exist." A neighbor, someone I'd known for years, Tommy Gaines, rancher down the road, stepped forward, eyebrows raised. "Colton, are you serious? She actually built that on your land?" I nodded. Every post outside the recorded line is hers. The permits she submitted? They're accurate, but her execution is imaginative. I've got documentation, plats, GPS readings, all verified and notarized. Karen scoffed. Oh, please. You're just hiding behind your papers. Maybe if you got off that pedestal, you'd see that nothing's that exact out here. I straightened, the calm I had cultivated for years solidifying into quiet authority. Out here, Karen, exactness matters. Lines in the dirt matter. You can't just place a fence where it looks good and call it legal. That's not how the county works, and that's not how property rights work. Her face flushed, and she glanced at the board members lingering nearby, hoping for support. A few hesitated, exchanging uncomfortable looks. They weren't sure if they should back her, and for the first time, I sensed cracks in her armor. Karen tried to take control, motioning dramatically to the crowd. See? This is why we need rules. This is why we have permits. But apparently, Colton here thinks he can interpret the law however he likes. I stepped closer to the fence, letting the weight of my presence do some of the talking. I didn't interpret the law, Karen. I enforced it. And right now, your fence violates it. She bristled, her voice rising, though her confidence wavered slightly. And what, exactly, are you going to do about it? Call the county again? I already called a lawyer. Ah, yes, the predictable escalation. I nodded, gesturing for calm, letting the early afternoon sun catch the glint off the metal corners of my survey case. Perfect. Then let's make sure your lawyer sees the facts clearly. GPS coordinates, survey plats, photographs, every inch of encroachment documented. If your lawyer has a problem with the truth, that's between them and the law. Mark, ever the uneasy spectator, muttered something under his breath, but Karen didn't hear him. She was too consumed with trying to maintain control of a situation that was slipping through her fingers. The standoff lasted hours. I spent that time walking the property, clipboard in hand, checking stakes and lines, photographing discrepancies, logging every misaligned post. Karen tried subtle sabotage, moving stakes, arguing that I was trespassing, even yelling at neighbors to ignore him, as though law and facts were optional if shouted loudly enough. But every move she made was futile. Every action only strengthened my case. The sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, turning the sky into a canvas of orange and crimson. The pasture looked like a battlefield, white rails stark against the green grass, cattle wandering uneasily along the edges, sensing the tension. I leaned against the corner post near the cattle well, letting the wind lift strands of my hair as I thought through my next move. Karen came toward me suddenly, striding across the gravel with purposeful fury. Colton, you think you can humiliate me in front of all these people and just win? Her voice was sharp, controlled, but I could hear the strain beneath the surface. I looked her in the eye calmly. This isn't about humiliation, Karen. It's about boundaries. Yours. Mine. The law's. And the law doesn't negotiate with stubbornness, nor does it bend for ego. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she might erupt, throw her coffee mug or scream, but she stopped herself. She realized that her kingdom of neatly trimmed hedges, strict mailbox rules, and committee power had collided with someone who didn't just know the land, someone who owned authority over it by law. Her eyes flickered to Mark, who gave a small, helpless shrug, silently pleading for a truce that didn't exist. Karen's mind raced, I could see it in her posture, in the slight trembling of her fingers. She was calculating, weighing options, but deep down, she knew she had gone too far. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and took a slow, deliberate step back. We'll see what the county says, she muttered, voice strained. This isn't over, Colton Hayes. You just wait. I watched her retreat, her back rigid with defiance, Mark trailing silently behind her. Even with a crowd of spectators lingering, the afternoon sun turning the fence posts gold, the power she had tried to assert felt fragile, exposed. Her ego had been bruised, though she wouldn't admit it yet. I stayed by the fence, watching the cattle move back into the pasture as they sensed the waning tension. The land itself seemed to exhale, the edges of Karen's intrusion no longer threatening the natural order. I touched a post lightly, feeling the vibration of the metal, reminding myself that the fight wasn't over, but for now, the law on the land had been respected. As the golden light dipped behind the hills, the quiet satisfaction of order restored settled over me. I knew the next move might come from the county, the HOA board, or even Karen herself, but one thing was certain: I wasn't just protecting property. I was protecting the principle that lines in the dirt matter, that the truth cannot be bent for ego, and that patience backed by authority always carries weight. And for Karen Mullins, the lesson had begun. By the time the sun crept over the western hills, turning the pasture into a field of molten gold, the standoff had stretched into a full week. Every day had been a careful choreography of observation, documentation, and quiet confrontation. I had walked every inch of my land, measured every stake, photographed every misaligned post, and catalogued every minute detail. Karen Mullins' fence, once an affront to the land itself, had become a symbol of stubbornness and the inevitability of justice. The county finally sent a representative out to review my documentation. It was exactly what I had anticipated: GPS coordinates, signed plats, photographs, all irrefutable. I walked alongside the county official, pointing out the encroachment, explaining the legal boundaries, and emphasizing how Karen's adjustments had crossed the line. Karen, of course, arrived with her entourage, Mark at her side, a lawyer in hand, and 2 board members trailing nervously behind. She walked with the posture of someone still trying to maintain control, though her tight shoulders betrayed the strain. Her eyes flicked from the fence to me, to the county official, and finally back to her lawyer, as if willing the outcome to bend in her favor. "You see, Ms. Mullins," I said, keeping my tone calm and professional, "your fence encroaches over 50 feet onto private property. These stakes, these posts, they violate county law. And your permits, though accurate, do not authorize encroachment beyond the recorded line." Her lawyer, a sharply dressed man named Dennis Harper, flipped through his folder, frowning. "Ms. Mullins insists this fence was placed according to HOA approval and believes that constitutes legal standing." I nodded slowly. HOA approval doesn't override county law. You can have all the rules, regulations, and approvals within your neighborhood, but when it comes to property boundaries, the county survey is the ultimate authority. That line, I said, pointing to the edge of the pasture, was measured, recorded, and signed off. It does not move. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She tried a smile, but it faltered almost immediately. Her ego, bruised and vulnerable, struggled against the clear, immutable fact of the survey. I could see the gears turning in her mind. She wanted to fight this, wanted to dominate, wanted to win, but the reality was written in the land, in cold ink on official documents, and in the unyielding logic of property law. Hours passed as the county official documented the site, verifying measurements and confirming that my records were precise. Neighbors who had gathered throughout the week watched in silence, some whispering quietly, others nodding to themselves in acknowledgement of the inevitable. Karen's supporters were shrinking in number, doubt creeping into their expressions as the truth became undeniable. Finally, the county official stepped back and spoke. "The encroachment is clear and documented. Ms. Mullins will need to remove the fence from the property in question or face a legal declaration of illegal encroachment." Karen's jaw tightened, her fists clenching at her sides. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Even her lawyer seemed uncertain how to spin this. Dennis Harper muttered something under his breath, clearly calculating that contesting this would be futile and expensive. I didn't move, didn't say another word. I let the law speak for itself. The silence was a presence, heavy and undeniable, and Karen's defiance began to crumble under its weight. As the afternoon wore on, the work began. Volunteers from the county arrived to assist in dismantling the fence. Karen hovered nearby, supervising with a rigid glare, but her voice lacked authority. The posts were coming down regardless of her wishes. Boards were removed, chains unlatched, stakes pulled, and each piece was carefully catalogued in case legal records were needed. I walked along the line, hand brushing against the familiar texture of the fence posts, feeling the weight of history and responsibility. My cattle wandered back into the reclaimed pasture, noses nudging the grass as if the land itself recognized that order had been restored. The scent of damp soil mingled with the metallic tang of dismantled fencing, an olfactory testament to both victory and justice. Karen finally approached, voice low, almost grudging. "Colton, you got lucky. I tilted my head slightly, letting a small smile play across my lips. Not luck, Karen. Lines. They matter. And so do the people who measure them. She stared at me for a long moment, fists still clenched, before finally walking away, shoulders slumped. Mark fell in step beside her, and together they left the property, the last traces of her temporary dominion fading into the distance. The sun sank lower, the sky a canvas of purples, reds, and golds, as I stood atop the ridge overlooking my land. Every corner post, every boundary marker, every ridge and oak tree felt like a heartbeat in the rhythm of the ranch. The battle was over, not because of aggression or intimidation, but because truth, law, and diligence had prevailed. Neighbors began to drift away, murmuring among themselves about what they had witnessed. Some congratulated me quietly, shaking my hand with a respect that went beyond simple neighborly camaraderie. Others simply watched, perhaps reconsidering their own assumptions about power, ego, and authority. The wind picked up, rustling through the tall grass and bending the trees in gentle waves. I felt the cool brush of air against my face and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle over me. The land was whole again. The fence, once a symbol of defiance and encroachment, was gone, leaving nothing but lines in the dirt and the quiet memory of what had almost been lost. That evening, as twilight fell, I walked the pasture alone. The sky deepened into violet, stars beginning to pierce the darkening horizon. I paused by the well at the center of the ranch, water glinting in the dim light, and thought about the week's events. The confrontation had been exhausting, frustrating, and yes, even exhilarating. But it had reinforced something I had always known: knowledge, patience, and respect for the law carry a weight that no ego can counter. Back on the ridge, I watched the silhouette of the Ozark Hills fade into night, the cattle huddling close, the pasture breathing quietly beneath the stars. Karen Mullen's lesson had been written not with words, but with lines in the dirt and the steady hand of a surveyor who refused to bend. The HOA had overreached, but the land and the law had reminded everyone who held the ultimate authority. I tipped my hat, a private gesture to the quiet order that had been restored. The ranch was mine, my boundaries intact, and the principles I lived by reaffirmed. The world might be full of people who misjudge power, who mistake volume for authority, who build fences on land they do not own, but on my land, the truth was absolute, and it had been defended. And so, as night fully settled over the Ozarks, I stood alone atop my ridge, surveying the quiet pasture, knowing that boundaries were not just lines in the dirt, they were the foundation of respect, justice, and the unspoken law that governs all who walk the land. The fence was gone. Karen Mullins had lost. And the land, finally, was at peace.